Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to Just in Time, a rapid fire roundup of current events in supply chain and beyond. With me again, members of the Anvyl team, CEO Rodney. How you doing, Rodney?
Doing well, thank you.
And from our global operations team, Dan and Will. All right, first, in a write-up on the drive to fund e-commerce aggregators like Thrasio and Perch, Supply Chain Brain suggests that the aggregator model is here to stay. Question: if that's the case, what are the benefits to small and startup brands selling to an aggregator? Dan, I'll kick it off to you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Great to be back with everybody here. So that model with the fulfillment by Amazon, it really helps those smaller retailers hit scale. And that's what the aggregators can give them operationally, marketing through like SEO, also supply chain side, like if there's redundancy in their supplier network or consolidation on container shipments as well. So you get a full turnkey efficiency that these companies haven't had before. And it's all about scaling to that next level. What it also does is like Amazon is just one channel that they're using. So margins are super tight there. And as they work with these aggregators, they can gain efficiencies across the board and possibly expand out of Amazon to other areas, such as they could get their own delivery model, maybe spur up their own fulfillment centers. They could have their own sales site, so they can actually compete with Amazon directly and add another channel. Or they could maybe build their own storefronts where they have all the products that they have there. So it's a really interesting model that they're building. And I would love to learn more or hear Rodney's thoughts on, could they turn into a direct competitor of Amazon one day with what they're doing on the efficiency side?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dan. I would say no, because Amazon is the ultimate aggregator, and it would be hard to compete directly with them. But I'd go back to the benefit of if you sold into one of these aggregators. And there's three things I look at. You just touched upon one that I think is probably the most important: economies of scale instantly, internally and externally. So everything from your team, as you're mentioning, external systems, suppliers, just makes you way more efficient as you're bundling all these business under one umbrella. The second is if I was going to sell into an aggregator, I would think about all the money I could put towards growth or other initiatives that I typically couldn't. And then lastly, it's a good financial outcome for teams. It could be good for the individuals and the founders or the businesses that you just wouldn't get in any other means. So I think net, it's a very benefit thing for companies. Well,
Yeah.
do you have anything to build on?
Yeah, Rodney, I think you bring up a good point, especially on the benefit side. As a small business or even a decent sized business as you're going through, I think the aggregators have a good idea of who does what really well, especially on the supplier side. And then really, are you tapping into those expertise? So, if you can save yourself, a supplier that's in California, but your business really should be on the East Coast, the aggregator is going to help you there. On the other instance, there's the ways of working and those economies of scale that you touched on, Ronnie, that, you may not know, and just tapping into a larger network, having that ability to figure out what's right or what's just a better way of doing it.
But off of right now, we're seeing that obviously a boon in Amazon side, and we've seen some companies look at Shopify or Etsy. Do you see those two gaining traction over time as well, similar to what we've seen with Amazon FBA in the last year plus?
I think the interesting thing on that, Dan, is how powerful is those platforms in general to where the aggregators start flocking to them, and where they say, okay, now ultimately there's money to be had. Not knowing necessarily the numbers from there. I think what we continuously hear is that it's pretty easy in terms of the process, both getting something started and going through and then building up, but then you hit that initial wall where the aggregators come in. Interested to see what you think, Rodney.
I would just rank order. Amazon for me seems most attractive, than Shopify, than Etsy or other. So I would see it happening probably in that order. And we're already seeing aggregators with the Shopify community as well.
Excellent. All good points. Moving on to our second question. In a year that has witnessed a lot of supply chain shortages, the Wall Street Journal suggested that the chip shortage facing the mobile industry is a bit of a different beast. Rodney, I think this question has you written all over it. Can you speak to the uniqueness of the matter? And then, is there anything that a supply chain manager in other industries might be able to learn from this issue?
Yeah, this is a great article just in general, and not just in terms of chips, but around the impacts of COVID, impacts of supply and demand in supply chain. So I really like this on multiple levels. And I see this as something as a broader lesson learned. But like first, I would just go into like to understand the why. Why is there a chip shortage? Number one, like silicon is made from minerals from Earth's surface, relatively available. So it's not a kind of a supply demand thing within the silicon world. These raw materials are turned into semiconductors, often coming from Japan, Mexico, and then they're produced in Taiwan, China, and the US, where a lot of capacity of these products and supply of the products are coming. So in the countries producing these, there's really a set amount of capacity. It's not something where you can just turn a switch and increase output of chips overnight. As you can imagine, you have what you have, and it takes a long time. So during COVID, there was a spike in demand for electronics. Probably a lot of people listening to this purchased more electronics than they normally would have, and that outpaced the capacity. And that outpaced the capacity because everyone in every industry that used these chips, so it didn't matter if it was electronics, it didn't matter if it's like vehicles, you name it, if a chip's being utilized, it's with the same capacity, with the same suppliers. And that's where the shortage occurred. So once you know the why, you should be able to look at how to fix this and what to fix short-term, but also long-term. And I'm clearly removed from my days in tech. I haven't been at Apple for many, many years. But what I would say is bigger companies are locking up capacity right now. Very unfortunate for smaller companies since they don't have that, the economies of scale we're just talking about. But they're negotiating things they haven't had to in the past, I'm sure. Outside of even locking in capacity, probably increase costs to get more production and numerous other things as far as the commercial terms go. But while both brands and suppliers are more than likely looking at ways to produce more, and they're looking at probably things around increased shifts, more lines, increased CapEx spend, different factories, I don't see that coming online for a good amount of time. But in general, like this occurs across different sectors and has always occurred across different sectors. So if you understand the why and the how, you can overcome this. And it's just a good warning for any industry, whether you use palm oil or other goods, the same thing could happen.
Great.
Do you think off of that, like there could be companies like just try to vertically integrate like the chips into their own manufacturing process, so that way they're not, if there is another demand spike caused, let's say COVID, the Delta variant or whatever, or another phenomenon that occurs, could that possibly shift in more CapEx? Because I think IBM may be working on something from previous news in the last couple of weeks.
Well, Apple's a good example of this. Apple has their own chips now. And at time when they're doing that, I'm sure a lot of people were questioning why they would want to just continue to purchase. Now you can see it was an ingenious move. They control their destiny, if you will, to where they're going. They can invest in their own manufacturing, their own equipment, their own factories, everything to mitigate any impact externally on supply. When you don't control your own factory, you're open to every company, Samsung, like Auto, Ford, etc., who will go to the same sources. And then it's a bidding war. And the last thing you want to be is in a position where your costs are getting increased for something that you could vertically integrate. That I think is a core competency for companies nowadays, especially in the tech sector.
Think about some of the smaller companies that are like trying to break into the space and knowing they only have a couple of options of how to get chips when they're competing against much larger players. And what do you think there's a couple things that they can do to, actually attain that versus, being left out in the cold?
Yeah, it's really hard. But the number one thing, I'd be patient, because if you can wait this out, eventually things will change. But very short term, it's going to be hard to compete against any of these major players.
Yeah.
You're not going to be like.
Do you ever hear of people being successful by just throwing money at it and seeing if they can beat somebody on pricing more?
Of course, I think that's always something attractive. Manufacturers are trying to, make money, so I'm sure they could figure out how to pull some units over to someone else that's going to pay them more money. But it's hard because when you're a small company, though, it's not like you have all that money to throw out things like this.
Sure.
Big companies are doing the same thing. So it's not like a small company thing. It's everyone's doing this same play, trying to throw more money to get priority within manufacturing.
All right, good stuff. Along those same lines, yesterday, Modern Retail covered how general supply chain shortages impact e-commerce operations. They quoted in this article one Rodney Manzo as suggesting that there was an opportunity for brands to switch to more sustainable materials. I'm going to put you, Will, in the hot seat. What's your take? What do you think of Rodney's comment?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good one. I think what we see as an overall shift here in the past, call it a year, 6-9 months, is that on the packaging space, there have been price increases across the board. I think we know from the inflation data that we're seeing things go up. We know that resin increases have almost doubled in some areas already, double, tripled in specialty resins. We know that molders are sending trucks directly down to the Gulf and getting materials straight from Mexico at the point to where there was a shortage and people needed to get raw materials in, or their lines are going down. And so with all of that happening, we see prices going up. So this has been a chance for, as a brand, for you to establish and say, okay, I know my prices are going up for X. If there is some ability to take a margin hit, what could we do on the sustainability front? Specifically on sustainability, people look at it in a couple of different ways. You can look at it and what's going to be the environmentally the most bang for your buck. Some people are looking for the most cutting edge for a marketing story. So ultimately, you're having to align on what is it that you're wanting to do from a company ethos. But knowing now that PCR for plastics are as readily available with the best pricing they have been because people are using it more. So your economies of scale is there versus where it was, even 5-10 years ago. Certain things such as, if you're wanting to use sugarcane and do that as a sustainable option, what you can see is everybody else wants to do that. So that pricing has been driven up. So it's ultimately looking at it, okay, what is the right thing you're wanting to get into? And then what is your appetite for taking that margin hit? And then if you are, your options then can be pretty bountiful based on what direction you want to go.
Yeah, the margin hit is really big for the smaller brands, where yes, lead times have extended outwards. So even for them, they can afford more. They already have increased costs in transportation. We know customer acquisition costs, especially on like native channels like Facebook, have probably gone up. So they're in a really tight situation, and they don't want to have an inventory squeeze either. So these small brands who are just starting to scale are in a tough spot with these, with like where raw material costs are. Even raw material costs to produce like a shampoo has increased. So they're getting really hit, and they have to somehow sustain this because everything across the board in all facets of supply chain are seeing increased costs. Postage is going up. Even freight is like at an all-time high on the container side. But also getting in front, to Will's point, the eco-friendly side is important too. Like if you're going the retail route, like Target has a mandate in a few years where X percentage of your package has to have some sort of recyclability or PCR content in there. So the trend is heading towards sustainability, but with those increased costs for the small companies, like they're in a tough situation, and that's the unfortunate side of things right now.
Yeah, the one thing I think is interesting, and that Dan brings up is that, if you're a brand and say you can be smart about it, you don't have to think about it in such, a huge leap. You can think about it as like, depending on the situation, say you're using ABS. We know ABS is in the next couple of years, maybe even sooner in the EU, is going to be cycled out. You can't recycle it. And then therefore it's going to make its way to the US and it's going to end up going the same route as PVC. So if there's certain materials you're using, it's an opportunity just for a simple marketing story and saying, okay, we're switching over to now PET, or we're switching over to, polypropylene PE. And we know that, from a recycling perspective in the US, things are under 10% versus in the EU, they're closer to 55, 60%. And so as a simple marketing story, by switching to the most plentiful resins that we have, you now can turn it into, this actually will get recycled versus this isn't getting recycled. And, it's similar to what the Poland Springs bottle does, like, hey, we lightweighted our plastic. Well, it also saves them a ton of money in doing so. So you can do it in a way that's both a good marketing story, but it's also, it works for your brand.
Great, thanks, Will. Did not know that about Poland Spring. I think we need to talk to their marketing department. But that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you, Rodney. I want to thank you, Dan. I want to thank you, Will, for again sharing your expertise with the audience today. And I also want to thank you guys who are watching this. If you enjoyed, please be on the lookout for the next episode of Just in Time on Anvyl. Share it with people. Tell everyone you know about these episodes, or share them out in your favorite platform. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about Anvyl, just take a visit to Anvyl at anvyl.com. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you next time.